Welcome back to Create Craft Costume. This is Cheryl, our fabric wizard.
This is Ashley, my apprentice. I charmingly and adoringly call her Grasshopper.
Or Grumpy if I'm sewing on curves.
But today, we're going to make these wonderful little fabric gift bags.
With lots of extras. So for starters, ours has a lining. It's very doable and it keeps all of your seams enclosed. We will also show you how to do a single pole or a double pole. And while we have 4 sizes already prepared for you, we will also show you how you can customize your bag to any size box that you need, plus more. So please stick around and watch, and let's get sewing. Here's a chart for 4 different size bags that we created. Our final measurements are in red on the side. If you want to know why this is different than perhaps the measuring you've done in school, keep watching this segment. If you just trust us and want to make the bag, pick a red measurement and skip to this section. I'm willing to bet that when you see length and width, some of these old volume problems might even pop into your head. This is not what we are doing. They are worthless for this project because you do not have 3 measurements. We are taking the entire width circumference like this. We are also taking the length circumference, which means the depth or the height of this box is incorporated in our length and width. You don't have a 3rd measurement. In school, our width would stop here. For this project, it does not. We are measuring all the way around the box in both directions.
So here's why we measure these the way we do. Say you want to make a custom bag for a particular item. This is how you would do that. This little box measures 9.5 inches around. That's the length of the bag. So we want it at least 9.5 inches. On this bag, it measures from the bottom of the casing to the bottom of the hem and back up the other side. 5 and 5 is 10 inches. So that gives us our height for this. Now, around the other side, it measures 8.5. So we're going to measure side to side on this bag. It's 4.5, but around the other side means it's 9. So that would be 9 inches. So this is going to fit like so. Da, da, da. That is how the bag fits, and there's the box. Now, when we refer to the box, we are talking about this bottom part right here. And there it is. You can see square. There's the bottom of the bag. That's the box. Now, the only thing that's different on this one is we don't like these little ears sticking out, which they naturally will do because there's nothing to fill in those. So we are putting those to the inside, making a nice flat box like here. There's our 2 little ears. We've tacked them down to make a nice flat square box.
So flat bags do not have this box vocabulary. So when you see the box portion, you have to add extra fabric down here to make this longer. So that's why when you see length, width, and box on our chart, we're referring to the fabric that you need to make this flat portion right here. As you can see on our chart in the first column, the small bag has the smallest box size at 2 inches, while the medium, large, and extra large get bigger boxes on the bottom to accommodate bigger items. Now that we've talked about the first 3 columns, let's talk about body fabric size. This is merely the fact that we are cutting 2 pieces of fabric in order to make this bag size. So we are taking the width and the length circumference and we are creating 2 side seams, which I know it's really hard to tell on this bag, but this is actually a side seam. And we'll show you how to cut it later. So she adjusted this to make sure that this would look like 1 piece of fabric. But we took the width and the length circumference and we cut them in half and added a seam allowance to each one in order to get the 2 pieces that we will make our bags with. In reference to our chart, let's talk about the total cut size which are these two pieces, versus the finished bag size. The finished bag size, the body, meaning from the string portion to the corner of the box, this is 10 inches long. That's what we mean by finished bag size. It's the item, or it's the area where your item would slip into. The 3-inch flop top is the area above the string. So this is our casing. We added 3 extra inches above it in order to finish off the top of our bag. So we're not including this portion in our finished bag size. The finished bag size only includes the size of the item that you will be able to fit in there. To get your bag started, you're going to make sure the edges of your fabric are square so that your pattern is symmetrical and straight as you're putting your bag together. Now we're going to make our medium bag, which is our 15 by 22 inch size, which we referenced on the chart earlier. You'll see here that I am cutting the 15-inch width first, and that's strictly because of the way our pattern is running. You will also see that I double folded the fabric, and that's strictly for camera purposes. Once you make your first cut, you are going to remove the selvages, and you see me cutting each piece separately here. And that's because I thought I was going to have to make more adjustments to our pattern, but I did not. And the beauty of our pre-done measurements is we maximize the width of this fabric. Because we went by a 40 to 45, you essentially cut this in half and you have your 2 pieces ready for you without any fabric waste. As someone who completely screwed up the first measurements of her bag, take some time with this, and I would put them on top of each other to see if they're the same size, because you might not be as good as cutting as the fabric wizard is. Speaking of which, in this next clip, you see her cutting the bag actually a little bit wider than we recommended, and that's specifically to maximize that pattern. And this is the pattern that you're going to see moving forward as we make this bag. And why do we have another color? Because of course we are adding a lining to this because it makes everything pretty. Don't panic though, this is the perfect time to learn linings if you're not used to it. And they're super easy because you're just cutting it the same size as your outside fabric. So in our case, that was 18 inches tall and 12 inches wide. Or if you've spent all the time figuring out the size of your outside fabric, you can now just use that as a pattern. So don't automatically think linings are too hard. All you need is to cut 2 additional pieces the same size as your outside fabric, and we're ready to put them together.
So putting your pieces together, the linings right side together, the outside fabric right sides together, you are going to sew down one side, across the bottom, and back up the other side, leaving the top open. You're going to do that on both pieces, exactly the same process.
Is this a typical way that you would put in a lining?
The answer is yes. Typically linings are made separately. So if you're lining a dress or a bag or a coat or pants, typically you make 2 separate pieces and then put them together. You put them together with the wrong size together so none of your seams show. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to sew those and then put one bag inside the other.
But not before we're going to clip those corners in order to reduce the bulk where our box space is going to be. Also, before anyone asks us in the comments, you may notice there are no pins on this lining or the outside fabric, and that is because efficiency is the name of the game when it comes to Carol and her tailoring skills. This is cotton. I have learned cotton doesn't move, but if you choose things like organza or satin, definitely use pins and wonder clips.
Okay, over to the ironing board. I realize that this is not everybody's favorite thing, and I realize that a lot of you probably think it's an easy step to miss. Let me caution you on this one. Please press the seams open, at the very least at the opening of the bag, because when you put these together, we're going to open that seam just enough to thread the ties through. So if you don't have these pressed open, it's going to be much more difficult to thread that tie through. It takes just a second. Press it right on open.
And for mere mortals who don't have a sleeve board, as she is demonstrating on the first one, you can just lay your seam flat on the ironing board and press it open that way. But if you see sleeve boards at like
the thrift store,
that one,
yeah, pick them up. You can usually find them for like 50 cents because nobody knows what
they
they're
are,
for.
and they're great.
Yes.
After they're ironed, we are ready to put them together. Key here is you need to make sure when you slip them inside each other, the wrong sides are together. So the outside bag is going to still be turned wrong side out, and you will see the right side of your lining on the outside of the combination. Okay, it's easier when you just look at what's going on screen. The right side of the lining is facing you. This becomes really important when you're making your box, as you will see what I did the opposite of later.
All right, now we've got the one bag inside the other. We're going to line up those seam allowances, match up those seams at the top of your bag, put a little pin on either side. You want to make sure you get that down as close to the bottom as you can. Then put your fingers down in the corners and put the lining as close to the corner of the outer bag as possible. This is really a place where you have to feel what you're doing. When I first started doing that, I would close my eyes so I wouldn't look at the fabric, and I would just feel for the seam allowance. Once you get those seam allowances on top of each other, then you know that the bottom seam along the box and the side seam up the side of your bag are matching up. Those are the two that you want to be laying on top of each other. Put a pin there. Then you're going to go out from that center pin to the side of your triangle and make sure that the lining and the bag are as close together as they can. If the lining sticks out farther than your bag fabric,
You'll feel it.
You will feel it, and your square is not going to be a square box. It's going to be skiwampus. So you've got to feel around, push it in, and then when you get that close to the edge, put a pin on either side of that. And then you're going to do exactly the same thing to the other side. I always try and lay it out flat to make sure that there's no wrinkles, no crinkles. It lays as flat as it possibly can be from side to side across the bottom.
And it's easy to see on cotton. You can see you get that really nice sharp point. It varies when you're using other fabric, but the key to this is feeling around. You want your outside fabric and your lining to almost feel like one piece. So the closer you can get them, the better your box bottom will be.
Exactly.
The reason you want to spend time getting these even and making sure that that side seam lays right across that bottom seam is because that's what's going to make the bottom of your bag even and not shift. We're going to measure up this seam to determine the box of our bag. So with that, would you recommend ever making a bag that is one continual piece top to bottom and eliminates that bottom seam?
Short answer to that question is yes, you can do that. My answer to that is no. Here's why. If you are not concerned about having the bottom of your box be a square. Now let's talk about what we mean by square. Boxes are square. We'll all agree to that. We're trying to make this flat fabric be square on the bottom. So if you're not concerned about having it be a perfect square on the bottom, there's no need to have that center bottom seam. If you want it to be a square, that center bottom seam is paramount to match the side seams, one on top of another, to make this edges square. They will be parallel, they will be even. So it's up to you. If it's not a big deal, you can do it. If it is a big deal to make a square,
cut two pieces.
You cut in two pieces, yes. Okay, now here is where all of your measuring is going to pay off. This is the fun part. We're going to make the actual square for the bottom of the box. We're going to go to the point of the triangle and we are going to measure down 2 inches. That will be for our 4-inch bottom seam. So you're going to measure across the bottom of your ruler 2 inches down from the tip. Once you mark that from side to side, you're going to sew across that, back stitching up both ends. That will make your 4-inch, the 4-inch sides of the bottom of the box.
Or another way of looking at it is you're not measuring 4 inches up the seam. You're measuring 4 inches across the bag.
Exactly.
If you measure 4 inches up the seam, you'll get like 8 inches off the bag and your box will be twice as large.
Exactly. So at the sewing machine, you're going to go straight across where you marked on your fabric. back stitch at both ends, on both ends, and then trim your seams. Then your bag will look like this. It has the two little ears sticking out. That means you've done it exactly right. That's how it's supposed to look. Then you're going to flip it inside, right side out, because you want to see how beautiful the square is that you just made.
So this is what we mean by even. All the lines are straight, and that's because you spent the time to match the side seam to the bottom seam.
And take an aha moment and look at it and say, oh,
I
it's
did
beautiful. Okay, on our bags, we're going to turn it right side out again. I don't like these little ears flapping around down the bottom, so we are going to bar tack those down. You do not have to do this, but it does give more stability to the squareness of the bag, so we recommend it. Put that triangle down against the bottom of the bag, and the tip of the triangle should match that bottom center seam. Now, I am going to highly recommend that you pin that little corner down on the top of that bottom seam.
Let's get real. If she's pinning, just do it.
It's going to move when you try and get under the presser foot, so just pin it in place and then go over and do the bar tack. On mine, I do it the widest I can, which is 5 wide, and then I'm going to put it on a 0 so it will just bar tack in place. Do that on both ends, trim your threads off, and you've got your bottom of the bag secure.
Now let's take a short break to talk about some of the things that can go wrong when you're making your first bag. One is it's wrong sides together. I did right sides together first because that's what I'm so used to hearing. So it's wrong sides together, but it's not just wrong sides. You want to be staring at the right side of your lining fabric, which, as you can see here, I am not. And this comes back to bite me later when I'm trying to do the bar tacks. However, it is really cool when you finally match up those seams.
Oh, you really can. You can feel it. That's awesome. I get real scared when she says feel for something because I'm like, what does that mean?
And that moment was short lived when I spent the next 10 minutes trying to line up the slippery satin fabric through two seams. If I had had the lining on the outside, I would be matching cotton, which stays in place and satin doesn't. So, of course, I managed to do this the hardest way possible, but I still got my bag square after fixing the ears like 2 times due to the satin shifting. And I'm thrilled. I'm so excited until I realize what side I'm doing my bar tacks on.
Oh, did I draw it on the wrong side? Yes, I did. Whatever.
So, because of the way that I constructed my bag, my ears are on the outside instead of hidden on the inside, which is not the worst thing you can do, but it's also not a mistake that I'm going to do again. So, when you're putting yours together, make sure you're looking at the lining and not the outside fabric. Back to Cheryl.
So this project is almost complete. Only 2 more things to do. First, we're going to finish off the top with just a simple hem, and then we're going to sew the casing so we can thread the cord through. So to do the hem at the top, lay your bag out flat and then trim up those edges so they are even, both the lining and the outer fabric. Once you've trimmed them off so they're straight across, sew around the edge of that, either with a zigzag or a straight stitch, just something to hold those 2 pieces of fabric together. Then go over to your ironing board, turn the under just enough to enclose those raw edges, and then turn it under again. This one here, we've got about 3/4 of an inch. Just, we wanted a little color on the outside. But how much you turn it over is up to you, just to make a nice hem around the top.
It also doesn't matter if you put the lining on the outside or if you decide that you want to fold it the other way and keep the outside fabric on the inside so it's all one color.
Great. Thanks for reminding me, because that is absolutely true. We just like this bright orange as pop of color on the outside, but either do it to the inside or the outside. Ashley's absolutely right.
And by that, she meant yellow. Orange is on the other bag.
Did I say orange? Oh my goodness, I'm also colorblind. Oh my.
Now we're going back to the ironing board where we're working with our yellow lining. And I noticed something that I was a little surprised by. You don't double fold this. You iron around the outside 2 separate times. You fold it down once, iron it really well, and then make your second hem. Is there a reason you did that instead of doing everything at once, just folding it all and then and only ironing around it once?
You are such an observant student. Yes, there is. In this case, there is. And I usually do fold it twice and then just iron it once. But I know this yellow gingham fabric. It is very, very slippery, and it's very, very hard to make a sharp crease on this particular piece of fabric. It's supposed to be all cotton, but I know for a fact it's not. And I don't know if it's got polyester or rayon. It might even have some rayon in it, but I do need to fold it separately and get a sharp crease on it. So that's why I folded it under to cover the raw edge and then folded it over again.
So on any slippery fabrics like satin, you would recommend doing each layer separately?
I would, yes.
I always do them separately, so that's why I thought I'd ask.
Now we are going to finish the top of the bag and sew that hem down. You're going to sew right along the edge of that hem. I like a straight stitch, but you can use whatever stitch you like, decorative, zigzag, whatever. But I'm using a straight stitch right here. I would also highly recommend pinning this in a couple of places. You are sewing through several layers of fabric. And as you do a hem on pants, you want that hem not to shift. So I would recommend pinning it in a couple of places so it will sew flat all the way around. You won't have anything a little bit ski-wampus.
And if it's satin, pin it everywhere.
Or those clips. People like those clips. I haven't mastered those clips very well, but you can use those as well. Either one. But I would secure it somewhere. Now, we're going to stay right here and we're going to sew the casing. The casing is not difficult, but it is a little tricky. So listen closely. You're going to determine where you want your casing to start. We figured in 3 inches on our pattern. You can adjust that at this point. If you want it not quite so big, you can certainly do that. So here I'm measuring 2 inches and 3 inches, deciding where I want it to be. You're going to start that seam and you're going to sew twice around the top of that bag for your casing. One thing you're going to do differently in this stitch around is when you come to the side seams, you're going to backstitch over that side seam to secure that, because that's where you're going to open that bag to thread your casing through, or your cording through. So do that all the way around and mark where you're sewing unless you have a pattern in your fabric to follow, because when you get all the way around, you're going to want to meet up directly with where you started. If it's a little ski-wampus, that's not going to be good for threading your cord and the look of your bag. So you want to make sure you come all the way around and meet that stitching. Then,
she's saying that because notice how there's no marks here? It's because she's using the directional fabric as her guide. I had to actually physically mark a chalk line on my first one.
Tailor's chalk is great. You can brush it right out. So this is important that it matches up. Now you're going to go sew around again. We are doing about 5/8 of an inch on this one because we're using very narrow cording. If you're using ribbon or the white heavy cording, you'll need to adjust your casing as such. So just make sure your casing is big enough that your cording will fit through. So all the way around again, backstitching over the seam allowances or the seams and making sure you match right up with your initial stitching.
Now that our casing is ready, we need an entrance for the poles for our bag. And to do this, you are going to unpick just the area of the seam between your 2 back stitches. We used 2 different tools, and I initially started with this unpicker, and you can see I actually pull a little bit of the lining. I found this a lot less precise. If you do the same thing, if you have backstitched correctly, it should not pull out and you should be fine. But I found that the clippers that you'll see us using in other clips, they were a lot more precise and easier to get in between those 2 back stitches and on that small of a seam. Now, if you're only doing a one-sided pull, you only need to unpick 1 seam. If you're doing a double pull, you're going to unpick the area between both of those seams before threading your cording through.
This is my favorite part because it makes the bag into a bag. So my favorite way to do this is just the old-fashioned way with a large safety pin. Whatever way you use to thread your elastic, do it the same way with this cording. I like the safety pin, but do not stick the safety pin through the cording. It's too narrow and it will pull out. Instead, thread the cording through the little circle at the bottom of the safety pin, and then tie it in a knot. And you have to tie a pretty secure knot. Again, it is slippery. Leave yourself a tail so if it slips, it won't come undone. Then put it in that first opening and scoot it all the way around the same way as you would do with elastic. Now, if you're lucky, you'll be able to zing right past the seam on the other side of the bag.
Ask me how many times I was lucky.
Murphy lives here. We operate under Murphy's Law. We are not always lucky. So if you get stuck on the other side of the bag on that seam, do not hesitate to open up that seam a little bit so you can get your pin out and then back in again. It's very common to do that. And because you have backstitched on both sides of that casing, there's no need to worry about that coming done or opening up. And then scoot it right on around and come out the original opening.
Here you can also see us using those clips to open up the other seam that I just found worked easier. And if by any chance you didn't realize that you were supposed to backstitch over both seams instead of just one, just go back and do that now. You're fine.
Righty, now, warning, do not cut your cording before you measure so you know exactly how much you need.
There's no coming back from that.
Yeah, then you got to thread up through all over again. So even up the ends of the cording and then straighten your bag out so it's open flat. Because if you cut it when the bag is cinched up and you open it, it's going to go inside. So we don't want that. So lay your bag flat, and then I recommend at least 6 inches extra. If you want to tie a pretty bow on the side, you're going to do extra. But if it's just cording, it's up to your personal preference. But do not cut the cording till you've measured extra at least 6 inches outside the top of the flat bag. Very important. Now, you can put some beads on the end. I just learned that these little beads are called pony beads. Whatever you call them, you can put beads on the end, wooden beads on the end, just tie a knot. You can finish it any way you want. What we have done on this is we have threaded the beads onto the cording and tied a knot at the base. Then above the beads on both strands, you're going to tie another knot. Both strands together, you don't want the beads to be sliding up and down the cording.
It also keeps the cord ties even, so you won't have to keep readjusting them as you're pulling the bag.
What else do we have to say?
It's done!
It's done! Yahoo!
Now you see the benefit of our 3-inch top because the top's really pretty.
Exactly.
It's done unless you want a double pull.
A double pull is exactly like a single pull, except you do it twice, starting once on each side of the bag. So first you're going to intentionally open each seam on the bag, one on each side. So you've got your openings on either side of the bag. So you're going to start on one side, let's say the left side, go in the left side of the bag and go all the way around in a U shape out again on the left side.
Don't bring it out the right.
No, don't bring it out the right side. Then the other one, you're going to go in the right side, go all the way around past the opening on the left and out the right side again. Now, just in case you have a little difficulty getting around that seam on the other side of your bag, that happens. I like to put something in there, a pencil or the tip of your scissors or something that will open that so you can see where to push that pin through. Just a little trick that will help you get that through.
But the key to this is you are running 2 separate cords and going in the same opening or going out the same opening that you are coming in so that you can pull 2 at the same time.
As soon as you've got your one all the way around, tie those ends together so you don't want that to come back in your bag as you're threading your second pull. That's imperative.
Because then you get to do it 3 times.
Yeah. Yep.
Once you have your second pull through, don't make this harder on yourself when you're trying to get them the same length. Just fold the bag in half, learned this from the Fabric Wizard, and line the pulls up before you cut them. Then you can decorate this to your heart content, but your double pulls are ready to go. Now that we have shown you how to put the basic bag together, you have a couple options to give some variety to your bags. One is specifically the top hem finish. On the bag you saw that we turned the lining to the outside. Here's an option where you can also turn the outside fabric in, and you can also cut your lining longer so that you have a much greater contrast at the top of your bag. that's what we're going to show you here.
This adorable fabric we fell in love with, but we like the dots so well on the lining. We wanted more of them to show at the top. So we cut out the bag according to the measurements on the chart, except the lining we cut 3 inches longer so it would have more of a contrast at the top. As showed earlier, you're going to sew both bags independently, put one inside the other to form the bottom of the box. After you've sewn the bottom of the box, check that to make sure that's all the square the way you want it to be, and then put them flat, line them up side seams together, and then pull that out from side to side to make sure your linings match the outside of your bag. Once you've got that lined up, put a few pins in there to secure that. The reason for the pins is I don't want the lining, now that we've got it all flat, to shift, meaning twist away from the bag. So we're going to put some pins around there. We don't want any puckers or gathers in that. We've got it all nice and flat.
And if she's pinning, just take the time to do it.
Okay, you can use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. It won't show. And again, just sew all the way around the bag. You can see that I'm sewing this around the arm. That's to make sure I do not catch the other side of the bag.
We're just making the outside and the lining match, not closing the top.
Exactly. I am staying right here at the sewing machine, and now we are going to finish the top. So we're going to pull the lining over and turn under the raw edge, 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch, whatever you're comfortable with, to hem the bottom of that. And then we're going to pull the lining down so it sits right against the top of the bag where we sewed. That will give us a nice, firm
Finished
at the top. There you go. So, and again, I would pin this as you go around. And let me just insert something here. The reason that fabrics shift is you're having several layers, because we've got the lining, we've got the bag, and then we've got the lining as the contrast on the top. That's 3 layers of fabric, plus the part that's turned under for the hem, which is 4. You've got 4 layers of fabric. Depending on how much pressure your machine is putting on the pressure foot through the needle, that's what makes your fabric shift. So for me, I like to put a little tautness in the front and the back to make sure they stay tight, depending on what you like to do. But if you pin it, you will have better luck that that top won't shift, so as you get to the other end, you won't have a little pleat at the end. Again, it's kind of a finesse thing when you have this many layers of fabric.
And by finesse, she means you will be practicing this the rest of your sewing career. Because I know exactly what you mean. And I am the one who ended up with a million little puckers at the end of her bag. So don't feel bad. Okay.
From here, you can add another row of top stitching around the top if you want, and then make sure you press that for a beautiful finish.
Now, for this section, I want to talk about how you can upgrade your sewing skills on a project that is not as intimidating as something that you're wearing. Don't forget that you can do fabric overlays. So for example, I found this organza at Walmart that I just thought was beautiful. And you'll see later that we also work with a chiffon. Both extremely different fabrics that I had never worked with. And I would much rather do that here than on a dress.
Chiffons and organzas, you've seen them in formals all the time. You've seen them in blouses. They give a beautiful sheen to the project. So we thought we'd add them to bags just for fun. Now, on this piece of blue organza, you can see the selvage is quite puckered. It's beautiful fabric, but a puckered selvage on organza is pretty normal. As you can see, there's a darker colored thread running along that selvage. That's what supports the selvage and keeps that in place, and it also makes it pucker. Logic suggests that a steam iron will take out those puckers. Usually the case, but not so much on organza. Never had great success. Better option, simpler option, is to adjust your seam allowance. As you can see here, if you were sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're still going to get those puckers. So adjust your seam allowance larger. In this case, we're sewing with an 1.5 inch seam allowance. You'll be able to sew a straight line with no puckers and still leave your selvage intact.
And that would be if I decided to choose this simple option, which of course I didn't. So let's move on to our last and hardest option.
So you can cut off the selvage, which is what Ashley chose to do, or you can clip that stabilizing thread every few inches. Both of those will get rid of the puckers, yes, but it will destabilize the fabric, which means, Ashley,
it will fray in ways you have no idea. So,
and fray quickly.
yes, just fray
Quickly.
looking at it.
Yes.
And don't even think about burning this or using any type of heat, because this is straight up plastic. So,
Yeah, don't ever singe organza. Do not do that.
So it was a learning curve. So if I could choose going back, I would just make my seams larger.
Yes. Okay, and as far as ironing goes, very, very cool iron. I usually use the very lowest setting on my iron, just barely on. If you have difficult creases, use a pressing cloth, but still keep that heat down, because once you melt that,
you're done.
You're done.
And here's just an example of the longevity I talked about, because it's already starting to snag and pull at the seams. So now that I've successfully intimidated you with organza, let's move on to chiffon, which is still pretty, and as I hope you can tell just from the shots, a lot easier to work with.
I love chiffon. And the purpose of an overlay, just for clarification, is to lay that over your main piece of fabric. So that's what we're doing here. I have 2 pieces that I've cut for the bag, and then I'm cutting 2 pieces of the chiffon to lay over that main piece, hence the term overlay.
The only difference in the construction of this is that you are putting your overlay in between your 2 pieces of outside fabric. Your 2 pieces of outside fabric should be right sides together so that the right side is on the outside of the bag. That means you're also going to put your overlay right side together in between those 2 fabric pieces so that the overlay is now the right side on the outside of the bag.
So now grab your pins or your magic clips and pin this around. I should have pinned it more.
Which she doesn't admit often.
I don't, but I should have. I thought I could hold it in place, and as you can see, as I was going around, the chiffon did shift. So I had to peek under there and make sure that all those 4 edges are together. So do pin this down. If you don't want to run the risk of sewing over your pins, put your pins down inside where you'll be sewing. Then you can leave them in and sew right around. But again, this will shift more than I expected it to.
Once the outside of your bag is put together, you're going to put your lining together separately, just like the previous ones, and you will slip them inside each other to make the box. Remember, you're looking at the lining fabric to make your box and not the outside fabric like I messed up the first time. Once the box is in your bag and you have finished the top, you are adding your pole the exact same way. You're going to cut through that overlay once you have made your casing. And in the case of chiffon, it won't fray out. In the case of my organza, the longevity isn't there. Just so you know what you're getting yourself into.
Okay, you have seen a few of the bags that we have created. The thing I like about these is they can be used all year long for 1,000,001 things. I started making these when my children were little to keep their toys organized, all the blocks or whatever. As they got older, they went to gym bags, sport bags for shoes, that kind of thing. I always kept them in the guest room or the linen closet with extra towels or sheets or blankets. Then they would come out, they would be pristine. Also in the car, we always kept a blanket and a pillow. I was forever folding those, so I made a custom bag to fit that blanket. They sat in the back of the car and they were always neat, didn't get dusty, and they were ready to use. These are 1,000,000 uses all year long.
And of course, the number one you probably think of is a giant red Santa bag, and that is the one that my family knows all the good stuff's in. Speaking of bags and good stuff, we put everything in the title, but we could only fit it in one part. So there's actually a lot that we can teach you about these drawstring bags, including how to add pockets, how to add contrasting fabric, and how to make one without the flap top that we've been using. So we will have a part 2 coming in the future. Please make sure to be subscribed and turn your bell notification on so that you won't miss that.
Thank you so much for watching. We would really appreciate seeing the bags that you are making and using at your house. So send us some pictures. We'd love it.
And you can do that over on our Instagram. And while you are waiting for part 2, we have another bag with matching blanket tutorial that you can check out right here. We'll see you in our next video.
Enjoy. Take care.
Bye.